after coffee, we thought a nice walk through the Royal Botanic Garden would be an appropriate way to spend the late afternoon. As at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, I was sure to see all sorts of plants I'm unlikely to come across in Europe, and I love looking at plants, as long as I don't have to tend to them. You remember from my Melbourne episodes, of course, that I'm a big fan of striking trees, such as this weeping fig. And the fabulously gnarled trunk of this tree, whose identifying label I forgot to photograph, as well as this equally attractive specimen. The light was fading on the ground, with sunshine still bright only on the roofs of the skyscrapers on Macquarie Street and the treetops. The bees in the area we weren't supposed to enter also appeared to have gone home for the day. There was still light on Bennelong Lawn at the northern tip of the garden, which allowed for yet another view of the Sydney Opera House from what I found was a particularly beautiful angle, and the Harbour Bridge. I wish I knew more about birds. I might have been able to identify the ones I spied through the fence of the grounds at Government House, as well as these two a bit later having a drink from the fountain as we exited the Royal Botanic Garden. We were also thirsty, but it was too early for a cocktail. I took time to appreciate the noteworthy architecture of the BMA House on Macquarie Street, built in the late 1920s. And then we walked through the CBD over to the Strand Arcade, which opened in 1891. In my opinion, a shopping arcade is always enhanced by having eye-catching floor tiling. Being distracted by that may have kept me from being lured into the store of the standout Melbourne-based Australian chocolate label Cocoa Black, and who knows what would have happened to me there. From the other end of the Strand Arcade on George Street, it's only a few steps to the entrance of the Queen Victoria building on Market Street. The QVB was built in the late 1890s and is now an iconic shopping arcade which offers plenty to look at above and beyond the shop windows, even if you're not in a shopping mood. Howard steered me past another Cocoa Black store, knowing the risks such places hold for me as a chocoholic, and we spent a delightful half hour wandering around both floors, focusing less on the shops and more on the architectural details. Tile floor patterns, stained glass windows above the doors, and pretty much everything about the grand central atrium. By now, it definitely was time for a cocktail. After a brief freshening up at the hotel, we walked back to George Street and found a spot by the bar at Establishment, where we had time to enjoy the huge indoor space lined by white columns, plus a very long marble bar, while we had a gin and tonic. From here, it was just a few minutes over to O'Connell Street to Izakaya Masuya, where we were booked for dinner. Howard assured me I was unlikely to enjoy such fresh sashimi anywhere else outside of Japan, and the sushi and sashimi menu listing the exact provenance of each fish, which changed daily, had me convinced before anything arrived. We quickly got an Asahi beer on tap, as well as something special from their sake menu, an unfiltered pure sake Fukuro Shibori from Kawatsuru Jumain Daiginjo. I left the sashimi order up to Howard, who has far more specific experience than I do after some 20 trips to Japan, and while that was being prepared, we were served our other orders. These included soft-shell crab on salad, which had us sighing with pleasure, miso-glazed eggplant, which was far tastier than it was photogenic, and a plate of tempura seafood. As for the sashimi, we had mirugai clam, chu toro, bass grouper, surf clam, scallop, scampi, and sea eel. Most of those from Japan or New Zealand, with the remainder from wherever they were freshest that day. I'll leave it up to you to match each of these 7 names to the correct fish and seafood items on the ice in the photos. A perfect meal to end our brief stay in Sydney, where I cherished the last nighttime views of the Sydney Opera House and Harbour Bridge. The next morning would see us on an early flight to Hobart, which will be where my next episode finds me.